steamed in a bit of corn husk, and then chiles en nogada, which were reddish-brown, somewhat wrinkled little peppers, swimming in a walnut sauce whose harshness and bitter aftertaste were drowned in a creamy, sweetish surrender. After that, for us, the thought of nuns called up the flavors of an elaborate and bold cuisine, bent on making the flavors' highest notes vibrate, juxtaposing them in modulations, in chords, and especially in dissonances that would assert themselves as an incomparable experience, a point of no return, an absolute possession exercised on the receptivity of all the senses. The Mexican friend who had accompanied us on that excursion, Salustiano Velasco by name, in answering Olivia's inquiries about these recipes of conventual gastronomy, lowered his voice as if confiding indelicate secrets to us. It was his way of speaking, or rather, one of his ways. The copious information Salustiano supplied about the history and customs and nature of his country, his erudition was inexhaustible, was either stated emphatically like a war proclamation or slyly insinuated, as if it were charged with all sorts of implied meanings. Olivia remarked that such dishes involved hours and hours of work, and even before that, a long series of experiments and adjustments. "Did these nuns spend their whole day in the kitchen?" she asked, imagining entire lives devoted to the search for new blends of ingredients, new variations in the measurements, to alert and patient mixing, to the handing down of an intricate, precise lore. "Tenían sus criadas," Salustiano answered. They had their servants. And he explained to us that when the daughters of noble families entered the convent, they brought their maids with them. Thus, to satisfy the venial whims of gluttony, the only cravings allowed them, the nuns could rely on a swarm of eager, tireless helpers. And as far as they themselves were concerned, they had only to conceive and compare and correct the recipes that expressed their fantasies confined within those walls, the fantasies, after all, of sophisticated women, bright and introverted and complex women who needed absolutes, whose reading told of ecstasies and transfigurations, martyrs and tortures, women with conflicting calls in their blood, genealogies in which the descendants of the conquistadores mingled with those of Indian princesses or slaves, women with childhood recollections of the fruits and fragrances of a succulent vegetation, thick with ferments, though growing from those sun-baked plateaus. Nor should sacred architecture be overlooked, the background to the lives of those religious. It, too, was impelled by the same drive toward the extreme that led to the exacerbation of flavors, amplified by the blaze of the most spicy chiles. Just as colonial Baroque set no limits on the profusion of ornament and display, in which God's presence was identified in a closely calculated delirium of brimming, excessive sensations, so the curing of the 100 or more native varieties of hot peppers, carefully selected for each dish, opened vistas of a flaming ecstasy. At Tepoztlan, we visited the church the Jesuits had built in the 18th century for their seminary, and no sooner was it consecrated than they had to abandon it, as they were expelled from Mexico forever. A theater church, all gold and bright colors, in a dancing and acrobatic Baroque, crammed with swirling angels, garlands, panoplies of flowers, shells. Surely the Jesuits meant to compete with the splendor of the Aztecs, whose ruined temples and palaces, the royal palace of Quetzalcoatl, still stood to recall a rule imposed through the impressive effects of a grandiose, transfiguring art. There was a challenge in the air, in this dry and thin air, at an altitude of 2,000 meters, the ancient rivalry between the civilizations of America and Spain in the art of bewitching the senses with dazzling seductions. And from architecture, this rivalry extended to cuisine, where the two civilizations had merged, or perhaps where the conquered had triumphed, strong in the condiments born from their very soil. Through the white hands of novices and the brown hands of lay sisters, the cuisine